There's a reason the park's empty in October. People say it's the cold or the early sunsets, the wet leaves and the way your breath looks like a ghost that doesn't belong to you. But it isn't just the weather. It's the part of the year when the forest remembers itself and the laughter drains out of the trails, and the air clarifies like a mirror held too close to your face. Summer is generous, even when it's hot and mean. It gives you sounds, boats, birds, children, the soft bickering of insects. In fall, everything that chattered all August goes quiet. The canopy thins. Footpaths show their bones. You step between trunks as if moving through the ribs of something larger than you, older than you, older than your species. You feel seen. Every park has a notice board at the trailhead. No fires outside designated rings. Pack it in, pack it out. Report suspicious activity. No sign says what the locals know and don't enjoy repeating. Some campsites are meant to rot clean, unvisited after the last Labor Day tent goes home. Because things step forward in the hush. Because whatever watched you all summer finally sees you standing still. 3 stories then. Not about ghosts, exactly, but about Daya. Recognition. The forest recognized them. And what says your name back isn't always human. They arrived with the careless rituals of people who still believed their bodies couldn't break. 12 friends, a nostalgia trip sewn together with bungee cords and bravado, 2 tarps, mismatched sleeping bags, a cooler that leaked and a second cooler that smelled like it had been forgiven too many times. Late October. The campground map, sun-faded behind plexiglass, showed loops, long empty, balsam, spruce, hemlock. The ranger station was shuttered, blinds slatted as if the building were squinting against what came next. They chose Hemlock Loop Site 14, a place with a nice lie to it. Lake access was a pretty phrase for a boggy cut of water where cattails held the shoreline hostage. There was a fire ring blackened, deep as a bruise. A picnic table with initials carved into it, K plus M 1999, and a wooden post with a crooked metal tag that still said 14 in a park employee's tidy hand. They pitched tents on ground that felt a little too spongy, stretched their tarps like hymns, and claimed the evening. Guitars came out. A harmonica tried and failed to find the key. Whispered rumors about a camp ghost became louder stories once the whiskey found people's mouths. By dark, the world had narrowed to a coin of orange where the fire licked the air. Beyond the circle, the forest wasn't black so much as full packed tight with trunks and the vertical shadow between them. Sparks climbed and vanished into that fullness like prayers that didn't need answers. There were a dozen faces turning and unturning in the firelight, too bright, then too dim, the way a memory refuses to stay still. No one saw him arrive. That's the first fact worth holding. There was no shuffle of leaves, no play of footstep noise into the rhythm of talking and bottle caps pinging off the picnic table. He seemed to have always been there in the background, the way guitar chords continue while you talk, the way the hiss of a can poured into a cup becomes part of other sounds. He sat at the outermost edge of the circle on a wind-thrown log tilted half into shadow, hands folded on his knees, a smile that had the polite tension of someone deciding to be pleasant and then deciding to keep deciding. Jack was the first to fail at pretending not to see. He squinted through the heat wobble, counted bodies that didn't line up. 12 had come. 13 faces floated a beat in the light. He searched his mind for the right box to put the stranger in. Friend of a friend, camper from the next site, ranger off duty, a neighbor from some other life. Memory gave him nothing but the impression of recognition, like smelling a cologne you wore in another decade. Not who, but the ache that there was a who. He leaned to Sarah and whispered, "What's that guy's name again?" The question returned to him empty. Sarah's frown said no. Chris shrugged, laughter missing. Emily's mouth did a brittle thing. One by one, the circle confessed with glances and small head shakes. Nobody knew him, and yet he had been sitting there long enough to belong to the moment. They had accepted him the way you accept a breeze. When Jack finally addressed him, no accusations, just the polite gatekeeping humans learned around fires long before laws, the stranger tipped his head the way dogs do when a word almost hits. The smile expanded one notch too far, revealing teeth that caught hues the fire should not make. He didn't answer. The silence got crowded. The headache came as a tide, not stabbing or sudden, but a time's pressure that found the soft seams at the temples and pressed again, and learned your shape. They went quiet because language requires spare space, and this took up all of it. Jokes dried on tongues, beer cans became heavy, fingers tingled numb. The air seemed to thicken with a smell that wasn't smoke, swamp breath and old pennies, wet fur and something that had been warm too recently. Sparks lifted, died. Somewhere, in the trees, a sound like antlers combing bark moved once and stopped. He rose, slow, the way taller men do when they're being careful of their height, except he proved taller than he had any right to be. The smile held, not as a facial thing now, but as a decision the face preserved. He stepped forward and the wood under his boot hissed, not from water or sap, a sound like hot bone cooling. His hand, too quick for the sluggish eyes watching, shot outward, clamped the ankle of the girl nearest the log. Her scream made it halfway to the trees before it came back changed by the cold. He dragged her with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a predator retrieving a carcass. She dug fingers into leaves that offered no help. Nails furrowed loam. The fire snapped at her hair, fell short. The rest sat bound to their bodies by the pressure, the way sleep paralysis uses you against yourself. No heroism appears in such moments. Physiology wins. They watched. Nothing decent keeps its shape under certain kinds of hunger. As he pulled her across the border where firelight spent itself, his silhouette confessed other parts. Shoulders popped out and stayed out. Spine rippled and arranged itself into sequences a human back cannot do. Legs inverted at the wrong hinge with a wet crack that lives in the gut. Something horned shouldered cleanly out from scalp and kept going. Branched and branched until the air threaded itself around tines. Skin, it held, somehow, and because it held, it had to thin. The grin migrated into a longer mouth, and teeth were not added so much as admitted. By the tree line, you could not call it a man. Calling it moose felt like an apology for failing to categorize. It was a waist-shape antler and limb and intent, wearing a man's last posture like a coat it had outgrown. The stink coming off it arrived in waves, bog and rot, and the after scent of something enormous that has been wet too long. Her voice broke into pieces and became distance. Twice it tried to be words. Both times it lost. Eventually the pressure let go. Limbs answered brain again. 12 staggered forward with phones as if light made of glass could serve as a weapon. They said her name until it sounded like a stranger's. The trees gave them what trees give. Dark, then more dark. A scrap of fabric snagged on a low branch, an earring in the duff. Drag marks that turned into nothing, where the ground hardened, or the thing remembered how not to leave sign. Dawn came pink and unhelpful. Breath hung in the air and then surrendered. They packed like the guilty do, quietly, clumsily, with long pauses for hands that couldn't remember how to tie. Their cars left twin dams of damp on the gravel. On the fallen log where he'd first sat, the bark had gone glossy and black, as if something hot and wet had leaned there too long and varnished it with itself. If you put your palm to it, and one of them did, because curiosity is as old as fear, it was still warm, a warmth not of sun or fire, a body warmth, drying. Searches happen because they must. Rangers, helicopters, A line of volunteers moving shoulder to shoulder through a grid, clipboards filling with tidy little check marks that looked like birds taking flight. They mapped the place the scream had broken at. They mapped the places the team dogs wanted to avoid more telling than where they wanted to go. Storms came and took the scent. Winter wrote its palimpsest. Spring tried to green over it. Years after, when the camp reopened for summer and families with well-behaved dogs and sunscreened children replaced the October echoes, a counselor cleaning the fire rings after a week of July campers found. In the ashes at Site 14, a small charm on a broken chain, a silver antler, too sharp for jewelry meant for a human throat. The charcoal around it had melted a little where it lay. No one tells that group's story aloud near the ranger station. Not because it's forbidden, but because the trees lean in when you do. The brothers were the kind of pair the woods tolerate. They packed out what they brought in, thanked a fire with water and a shovel, read a map with their hands as well as their eyes. Their childhood had been a string of weekend trails braided through a father's patience. By the time they were old enough to rent cars without arguments, the old man was gone, and the trips were an inheritance they tried to keep in one piece. October made the mountains honest. The deciduous skin had fallen, revealing ribs of granite and old slides that summer's foliage had hidden. The sun rode lower, its edges cooled to a hard brightness. It found ice and shadows at noon and pretended not to see. They set out on a Friday with the light behind them and packs that had been arranged and rearranged 3 times on the living room floor. A tin cup Girl Scouted to a strap clinked when they hit a root. The sound felt like a memory knocking to be let in. They hiked until the trail forgot it was a trail and became an argument between rocks and gravity. The younger one's shoulders still learning width hummed the 2 bars he always hummed when the grade got mean. Not a song, just a sound to keep boots counting. The older made the map his business and played out rope where the scrambling had teeth, because family roles calcify like that. One hums, one measures. They camped high in a soft bowl below a bald, a place with wind very much its own opinion. The site had been used but not honored, a black circle of old fire where someone had burned green wood until it sulked, a ring of cigarette butts a boot had tried to scuff into forgiveness. They made new ground 6 paces away, the way their father had taught them. The air smelled of crushed fern and the sweet iron of maple decay. They ate like kings of a kingdom that doesn't exist, stew from a pouch with names too proud for what it was. Chocolate that turned brittle in the cold and snapped like old paint. They turned their headlamps off early and let the vault of it find them. You can feel it when sound leaves a place. It's like the room turns and looks at you. The night did that sometime after midnight. The small threads of noise in the fabric of the world, gnat hum, quiet creek talk, twig flecks were pulled out, leaving a cleaner cloth, a colder thing. And into that, 3 notes. Not the wind fingering the mouth of a bottle, it was too deliberate. Not bird wrong hour, wrong insistence. 3 notes. Again. Low. Careful. Not quite minor. Not quite not. The younger's hand found the zipper because hands look for tasks when they're unwelcome at certain emotions. He paused. The sound came again, closer enough to flatten the space between tents and trees into one place. He thought of a person practicing to whistle quietly, to be good at not being heard, and the thought didn't make anything better. They lay with chests teaching lungs how to be small. The sound went as it had come. A decision, not a fade. Morning returns courage the way coffee returns blood to fingers. The older laughed without laughter. It sat in the air dumbly and waited to be treated as a joke. Bootlace knots were done with more focus than necessary. They found old trail cairns kicked over, and the stones stacked again but wrong in architecture with no human grammar. The map felt a half-inch inaccurate. That is how it begins. Not with a missing mile, but with a trail that arrives a heartbeat too late for your feet. They promised each other out loud to be cautious, and out loud became the first lie of the day. The second night the tune returned earlier, before the dark fully set. Testing. The pattern changed. It listened, then times answered. 1 note for each chop of the axe. 1 for the hiss when the stove lit. 1 for the cough the younger tried not to have because air is judgmental when it's cold. Mimicry, at first imperfect, then better. The brothers stopped moving for a while so the woods would have less to copy. The woods copied their stillness. You can't win that game with something that doesn't breathe the way you do. They tried a scare, a sharp, forming your mouth around profanity yell into the tree line. 3 notes came back soft, amused, then slid into something like a chuckle draped over a flute. Out here, a gun is vocabulary, not a solution. The older put a round into the damp stump beyond the fire with his ears already flinched for the recoil. The sound smashed itself against the stone and ran out of places to go. The whistle waited politely until the echoes emptied, then offered back a longer, thinner tone that found a pitch you feel in your teeth. It made both of them bare their molars without meaning to. Inside the tent, zippers with lives of their own, the younger's bladder became a moral debate. He lost. He took the light, because we always take the light, even when we know light makes us a story other things can read. The cold caught him at the hips. He stepped into the leaves as if stepping into an audience. His breath made a little cloud, and the cloud's edges were a geometry lesson. He focused on the small job. No metaphysics, just a human doing a human thing in the dark under the approval of stars that don't care. The tune arrived at his ear right there with the ridiculous intimacy of a whisper from someone you didn't know you'd invited close. 3 notes. The exact timing of his breaths. He pivoted. The beam ran ribs of oak and beech, found the high shine of a spider web like a flayed harp, recorded nothing that could whistle. The sound had no source and proved it by moving behind him faster than a body can move in undergrowth. Back at the tent, the older lay a long time teaching himself not to call a name that shouldn't be spoken in a voice that wouldn't carry help. He dreamed a dream of movement just out of frame the way dreams let you know something enormous is there by showing you only the place it isn't. He woke to daylight that had overslept their plan by a criminal margin. He reached for the shake beside him and closed his hand on nylon. A sleeping bag lay perfectly zipped, a pious little promise of occupancy. Inside, nothing. The weight of it was wrong in his arms. Not body heavy, but leaf heavy. He spilled it, because your hands will betray you when they need to, and the dry crumble of oak and beech leaves sighed onto the ground. They had the darkness of old paper, the smell of rooms no one opens. He ran in the way that uses up the battery of running so fast it has to fail, called the name because now there was no reason not to, looped the clearing's perimeter into a figure 8, found sign that led into sign that led into the agnostic shrug of rock. At the 3rd hour, he began to bargain out loud with a god he didn't owe anything to. At the 4th hour, the first snow of the season tried a handful of white at the ridgeline like a joke about purity. Searchers came and searched the way they do when they love a procedure more than they love the odds. The older stayed until the team in orange hats gently asked him to go home. The mountain took the brothers' tune and kept it. In April, when meltwater scoured the ravines raw and the first black flies stung the season awake, a pair of trail stewards found a cairn at the mouth of a dry stream bed. It had 3 stones, 2 ordinary, the top one oddly round, oddly smooth. The smooth one had a groove in it like the shape of a mouth frozen. When the steward blew across it the way you do when you're 10 and the world is still a toy, the stone answered with 3 notes. They left it where it stood. Some objects are better undisturbed, the way you leave a sleeping animal alone, not because you're kind, but because you know the difference between mercy and self-preservation. If you hike that drainage in late October and put your ear near where the wind collects, you can hear something use your breathing against you, teach it to a song, and give it back. 4 men who had shared the same November for 20 years parked their trucks beside a gate that always looked on the verge of giving up. They had the practiced gravitas of a ritual they no longer needed to defend to their families. Blaze orange vests draped over flannel like flags, thermoses dark with coffee that could strip paint. Hands that knew what you could do with a knife and what you shouldn't. The elders of the group told the story of a buck from '03 the way others tell wedding toasts. The youngest, newly sworn in, listened with a respect he didn't know how to hide. The forest received them without comment. The first frosts had taken the insects away, leaving the air glass clean. Leaves layered the ground in a map of color only the wind knew how to read. They scouted sign the way believers read, scripture bent grass, a scrape, raw and wet, pellets beating like resin. There's an ethics to this work if you let yourself inherit it. They did. They avoided the salt lick other men had tucked under a cedar, because cutting corners cuts you. They crossed a creek on a fallen birch and the bark lent their palms its confetti. Their camp was a clearing that hadn't been a clearing until someone who loved this place a long time ago loved it deeply enough to carry rocks until his back remembered. The fire ring showed respect, true circles do that. They set their tents at the near edge, where the trees stepped forward, because sleeping fully in the open makes humans feel like spilled milk. Dusk came with the speed of a dropped curtain. Coles did that private whispering they do when wood thinks about becoming something else. They were men who had told the same jokes enough times that they'd learned to laugh at the shape of them rather than the words. The new guy nodded where appropriate and sipped the scalding coffee like a pledge. They spoke quieter as the night appeared, not because of reverence exactly, but because quiet asks for itself in certain places. When the wind failed and the fire's talk became the only noise, they all noticed the same thing at once, how nothing else spoke. No saw-whet wheedling the outside of your hearing, no wing noise. The creek itself seemed to lower its voice toward listenable. The first rustle was ordinary. Animals test borders all evening. Sometimes you hear them test you. Men get to show they're not animals. They keep eating. The second rustle had a body to it. A line of something moving through leaves. The man with the best eyes, because some men always come with that, lifted his lamp and the beam met a deer. And another. And another. They were closer than deer choose to be when men glow like embers. A dozen at least, standing at the very edge where teenagers in films learn a word they'll never say right again. Tree line. Not feeding, not stamping. As if someone who knew where legs went had arranged legs into poses and then left the room. That's not the uncanny thing. Deer stand. Deer look. The uncanny thing came when the beam took their faces and their faces *** didn't take it back. The reflection you wait for the bright coin of an eye answering yours didn't happen. Sockets are not supposed to be seen filled with dark water. The lamp kept searching for the little mercy reflections give you, the proof you're still in a world with rules. It found wet and depth and the soft shine of meat where, looking, should be. Hunters are not strangers to broken things. The body is a bag of surprisingly reasonable parts if you've been trained, but there are breaks that invite not thinking. They felt it at the same time the way a hand goes to a child's shoulder in a crowd because a mood has passed through people and no one knows who made it. The largest deer tilted its head like it was listening hard to a station barely coming in. Its jaw softened open. There's a pop that happens in shoulders and hips when a body asks for more room. Something like that happened at the corners of its mouth, and then a voice spoke from it. Not the awful, glorious squeal of a rabbit when a hawk takes it. A man's voice. One of the men at the fire. The cadence was too specific to deny. Come with me. It said not request, not demand. A factory setting in the language of friends. The phrasing you use when you know the route and someone else doesn't. The men forgot their hands. The fire didn't blink. It never does. The deer's pale tongue showed wrong shape, wrong color, like a mushroom that had learned to be wet. The mouth made room for too many teeth. The socket hollow didn't blink. You do not realize how much restarting of eyes you depend on until it is taken from you. Then the others followed the leader's example. Jaws opened, Mouths reshaped, and a chord happened, each deer spilling a voice that belonged to each man around the fire, overlapping in ugly friendships. Names spoken by the people who owned them, but not from mouths that should not have been able to form syllables. Some pleaded, some promised. The new guy heard himself call from a small distance as if at a bar door. "Hey, over here." He had a twin urge to answer and to run. Men who've put their fingers into the warmth of what they've killed don't faint easily. But they can freeze. There is a kind of stillness the body throws up like a shield when the choices are wrong. What broke the spell was small. A coal collapsed in the fire and a jet of sparks leapt sideways, a comet shower that brushed the hoofline. As those bright flecks hit hair, the voices stuttered, not in pain and error, like dropping a needle. A pause, a recue. The men stood at the edge of motion the way a deer stands at the edge of road. The herd turned, not in a group sway the way real deer turn, but as if someone pulled a string through the line and damped the ends. Hooves wrote long sentences in the leaves. The men waited like boys at the end of a hallway in a stranger's house. Night settled again as if re-choosing them. Eventually the talk came back in small pieces. Men are good at measuring and mismeasuring the size of a thing with words. They agreed to sleep. They agreed to wake. Nobody said watch because then you're only watching and not sleeping, and the body is a traitor. At dawn, the 2 tents on the far side of the ring had their zippers closed. It is the kindness of zippers that they can pretend. The men who remained pretended also for the length of a breath, and then began the inventory. 2 rifles untouched. 2 knives still sleeping in sheaths. 2 packs formed the shapes of their owners' backs without the trouble of owning them. Inside each tent the sleeping bag had been arranged with the kind of care men don't give to their own beds, pulled straight, zipped, a pillow dent arranged like a joke about dreams. The ground around the camp was a language. Hooves wrote a single phrase over and over, not away, not out, but in. Converging from the dark into the light of the ring, to the tents, to the door flaps, to the very seams where fabric pretends to be barrier. In the shallow trench where a tent floor had met the earth, something had pressed and then lifted a lot. The prints looked like hands that had not learned to be hands. The men collected evidence the way frightened people do. Too much of the wrong thing, not enough of the right. They blamed each other for a minute because blaming is a kind of breathing. They did not find blood. They did not find parts. They found a small arrangement on the stump by the ring. 3 lower jawbones, cleaned too quickly to be clean, arranged into a triangle pointing at the path out. In the triangle's center, a circle of white field mushrooms no field would have grown there, caps shining as if kissed with fat. One of the men swore they weren't there when they'd sat down. Another swore he'd seen them and chosen not to see them. The story doesn't get better when it gets bigger. Rangers came with their quiet voices. A chopper put down wind that pulled secrets out of underbrush and got disappointed. Camera traps from the previous season latched to maples 20 yards off were collected and read. Every night between midnight and 2 captured images filled with white static holes, ovals the size and shape of eyes where no animal stood. Occasionally a frame showed deer moving as if someone had animated them from memory, the legs not agreeing with the ground. One sequence 15 frames caught the curve of a jaw hinging farther than it had any right to, the shape of a tongue that time forked, and then changed its mind. No bodies, no answers. The men still meet the first week of November because rituals keep men whole. They do not camp in that clearing. They do not bring the new to that place. The young one grew older and put his orange vest in a box that held other things he loved only in particular light. On bad nights his phone sings with notifications that don't exist, and when he opens to find no one, there a second sound slips behind the first, his own voice, dull with distance, politely asking himself to follow. People say the woods are empty in autumn. They're wrong. The woods are uncluttered the way a museum closes for a day, unhooks the velvet ropes, and lets the statues breathe without witnesses. If you camp after the last families fold their tents, you will inherit freedoms no permit mentions. You will also inherit the attention usually distracted by picnics and music and small talk. The forest does not love or hate you. It times registers you. It counts. It remembers which log you chose. It notes the song you hummed. It learns the weight of your name in your own mouth. So pack well and leave little. Keep the fire inside its ring and your curiosity inside your ribs. If an extra face finds your circle and your memory can't find it a name, shrink the circle. If a tune offers you 3 notes and the precise shape of your breathing, change how you breathe. If animals look at you without eyes, and your own voice comes out of their throats, refuse to be flattered by the imitation. Autumn isn't cruel. It is honest. It strips things down to what they are: bone, bark, intention. When the season turns, the forest takes inventory. If you let it, it may place a hand on your shoulder not to comfort you, but to see how easily you move when touched. Go, if you must. October is beautiful. The air is a new blade. The stars are loud. Just understand, you aren't going there to be alone. You're going to be counted.